Welcome back to the Frank Talk Radio Dialogues, and we are continuing with Kagiso Media CEO, Mr. Morobe, as well as Simphiwe, who will be joining us, speaking to us about the various issues around heritage, around culture, as well as identity. Now, before the break, Mr. Morobe was asking you about the 1976, as well as when students rejected Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, which you obviously went so far to address. In fact, speak about the fact that you too are very good in Afrikaans right now. In fact, better in Afrikaans than you were in Zulu. It's quite an interesting one. And I'm going to actually pose a question to you, Simphiwe. You know, as an artist who performs in Xhosa, would you say that there is many opportunities here in South Africa as there are internationally to gain prominence?
Interesting question. Okay, there seems to be, especially in Europe, it's the same opportunities as here in SA for gigs, because Europe is more multicultural. It's more like a multicultural pot, you know. They welcome music from all over the world. But I would still say there's still like a dominance of English. You see it also in the payment packages. When you sing in English and when you sing in an African language.
But what do we do then? You know, as I believe that there are many South African artists who might even be listening to the show right now and thinking, fine, the payment package is not so good. But what do we do to ensure that we get to a point where if you're singing in isiXhosa, you get the same payment package as you would when you're singing in English? What do we do?
I think it's a tough one, you know, because it seems like we really love our English everywhere in SA. So it's really a tough one. It might be a lost battle. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Mr. Morobe, what is your take on Dr. Blade Zimade's proposal of speaking, reading, and writing in indigenous African languages? Should it be considered, you know, as a prerequisite for tertiary education qualifications?
Look, I mean, I think the 1994 has a value proposition for us as South Africans. One of which is the restoration of the dignity of our people, of ourselves, of every South African. And one of the ways in which that's done is by the recognition of the right for people to speak in their own languages. But having said that, as a policy position, you know, it's a good statement. I think it must be supported. It is important for us to make everybody feel that they have a right to be South Africans, to be protected by this constitution. But at the same time, there has to be a dose of reality about life as we have it today, because that it means that as South Africans, we have to transcend across cultural, racial, and language barriers. We have to consistently find a mechanism that would enable us to effect those transactions. Now, there are a number of ways in which that is done, that can be done. In fact, one of which is for government to invest in sponsoring and supporting the proliferation of more languages, or in fact, the proliferation of our languages in terms of encouraging writing in indigenous languages. The scholarships must be targeted. In fact, how you direct your funding from the fiscus, insofar as that policy objective is concerned, where you can incentivize the environment. Because if the incentives are pointed in the right direction, I'm certain that, in fact, people will respond to those incentives. But if you make a statement and you put funds into the public kitty, there is no rhyme or rhythm to the way in which those funds are spent, you'll never attain those objectives. So in terms of public spending at local government and national government level, the conditional grant mechanism in expenditure has to be, in fact, considered as an important tool that government needs to actually improve its ability to utilize them. Because in many countries in the world, when they have an objective, in fact, now we've just said the Olympics.
Yes.
We've just said the Olympics. If you look at the performance of the British athletes, you can go back to a decision they've taken years ago that at these Olympics, British athletes are going to perform to a particular standard. And they directed funding in a concerted way into programs. They took the lottery funds and they directed them there. You can see what the output of that is. So it can be done, what Dr. Nzimande actually calls for. But at the same time, it's not if you throw it there into the system, you'll cause confusion without giving clear direction, because it's fine to make a statement. It's a different matter to follow up with actual steps, targets, put money and resources, put the incentives right in universities. Then you'll have the writers coming up, and then you'll have the publishers coming to the party as well.
Now we are taking your calls on your comments as well as questions on heritage, culture and identity as a young person. Give us a ring, 011 772 0992. Mr. Morobe, I'm actually going to ask you this question. When we look at South Africa and how we are aiming to be part of a global community, how do we move with the times, especially as young people, and fit into that global community, yet remaining true to our culture, to our heritage, as well as to our national identities?
In 1972, when I joined the South African student movement, after it was formed, we then said, what is it that we can do as young people that could actually give us access to more young people to come in? We then formed cultural groups. We had a group called Kindlemoga, which meant arise. There was Mihloti and other groups. And in those groups, we had poetry reading, we had music, we had actually plays that were actually politically conscious plays that we used to, as we said, to conscientize the people. Now, those activities are important for young people. It's about getting involved in your local areas. You don't have even to aim for the stars. Look in your own area. There's material that can be used. Be active in your schools, in your youth organizations. I work with young people now in an organization called Simphiwe. One of the mantras in that organization says to young people, we call for discipline, we call for spirit, and we call for purpose. So when they meet every morning, they chant that to themselves to say spirit, discipline, and purpose. Now those elements, they are derived based on our experience of where young people are. Because if you don't have a fostering of that element of spirit, because spirit is about your own sense of being, the way you feel, your ethos, your mindset, it actually enables you to be able to engage with anything that you meet, let alone the universe. Because once you have those three, I can tell you now, the world is your oyster.
Simphiwe, you've been very robust in terms of your opinion and your take, especially when it comes to heritage and culture, as well as the Biko legacy. But for those who do not know, the Biko legacy, what does it mean to you?
For me, Biko is the one leader who makes sense in what he said and in his philosophy, what he stood for. His approach was more than just about the physical emancipation of Black people. He also very much focused on the psychological aspect of it, which for me, I don't believe that even when you have got the most money, if you are not psychologically, spiritually emancipated, there's a reason why we have so many corrupt leaders and people that do actually not care about the progress of Black people in general, who get into offices and rather empower themselves instead of empowering the whole nation. And I believe that this psychological trauma that we have not even begun to start to deal with could be part of the reason why. I cannot believe that after centuries of oppression, people would come out psychologically sound. And that is why I put so much respect for Steve Biko, because he believed that that would be the first step in freeing Black people. And it is quite problematic that we have never had that, what do you call it, like a session with a shrink,
Counsel.
Therapy.
Yes.
Counseling sessions.
We need therapy in the country, first and foremost, before we can even get to running the country. That is why I've got so much respect for him.
I believe that we've got a question from our audience. Please state your name and your surname, and then go ahead with the question.
My name is Kalibai. I have a comment and a question in a sense. Something that's happened is that everybody, I think, believes by now that, Steve Biko's book was actually quite a great read, particularly to direct the way we think. There's quotes about, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is in the hands of the oppressed. Sorry. But a lot of these words and a lot of these phrases that come out of that book are in English, and they have been difficult, and the book is actually quite difficult to read in English. And I think some of his thoughts, because firstly it was bright, but also because we're in English, have not been able to be translated in a way that people could understand them so that they could be useful for them, so that it was difficult. And if you notice, for example, without making any statements about religion itself, where it is, for example, the Bible is translated into almost every language, so that actually everybody now understands what the message in the Bible is, in terms of who Jesus is and everything that it teaches. But we haven't been able to receive the teachings of black intellectuals, so to speak, or black leaders, because and a lot of them are in English or in other European languages or even Afrikaans. And is it therefore is it impossible to be able to translate these into languages that young people can understand, because they go to church and they read the Bible in Xhosa and in Setswana, and they understand it? Is it possible to translate some of these thoughts into languages that can then reach South Africans for consciousness, for nothing else?
Mr. Morobe?
I think that's the point I was making earlier on about what, from government perspective, what government can do, to influence publishing in the direction that you're suggesting. If you think about it, the missionaries were really focus group. They believed in something, they knew what they wanted, and they put resources and money behind it. And they had explorers who went into jungles carrying the Bible. They sponsored them, they supported them. Right now, they crisscross the entire globe. Now, that's just one way in which you attain your objective, because, as I said, there are resources available. There are people who write things every day. Now, if we say our policy is to encourage the proliferation of the rest of the language groups other than English in the literary sphere, the resources must then be directed in a way that they incentivize authors, they promote writing. The universities, have to actually come to the party. Because I can tell you now, 10 years into the democracy of this country, the universities that we're talking about that actually have to produce these intellectuals had not even had a convocation amongst themselves to say the paradigm has changed, what is our new brief as institutions that must produce the next range of intellectual capital. They are playing catch up now, but even as they do so, they get caught in what Simphiwe was referring to. They've got their own issues of corruption and personalities. They come to play, and suddenly the universities become an arena where personal agendas begin to proliferate rather than the core objectives for why these institutions are there in the first place. So in a way, I think we have the resources in this country. It's about getting our government and our public officers to put the right programs of incentives to create the opportunities.